Hello everyone, welcome to Tech with Machines. In our previous video, we talked about big data challenges, and in this particular video, we will talk about Apache Spark's architecture. This is going to be a architecture heavy video in which we will go through multiple components involved in Apache Spark's architecture and what each one of them actually does in Apache Spark. Also, at the end, we'll have one bonus question which generally is being asked in interviews, and it's specifically related to how Spark deployment happens. So let's begin today's lesson on Apache Spark's architecture. So before we jump into architecture, I just want to give a quick overview of what we learned in the last video, where we talked about what really is Apache Spark and how it helps us to overcome big data challenges. So a quick introduction, as you can see in the screen, is that it's an open source distributed computing engine which can do parallel processing, distributed computation, and it can scale with increased workloads, helps us in better scalability, has fault tolerant mechanism, can work even in case of errors, can partition data, which helps in distributing the data, and have diverse library support and language support, is available in Java, Spark, R, Python. So let's deep dive into Spark architecture. As you can see on the screen, there are multiple components being involved in Spark architecture. One of them being driver and the other set being executors on the other side. And in between we have cluster manager. Now what it really means, you will get to understand this in just few minutes. As shown on the screen, you can see that driver is connecting with cluster manager and it is also connecting with executors. So is a cluster manager, which is coordinating with driver and executors. So what really driver is? Driver is actually the main entry point of the process which helps you to run Spark application. It creates a Spark context object. Spark context object is the main entry of a Spark application, which represents a connection to the cluster and helps to create resilient distributed data sets, a fundamental data structure of Spark. So if I go back, so driver is actually the main entry point of your Spark application, which is helping you to run the application, and also distributes tasks among executors which generally run on worker nodes. Now cluster manager is another important component of Spark's architecture. What it does is it manages the resource allocation and worker nodes in a cluster. There are multiple cluster managers available in Spark. It has its own standalone cluster manager if you are not using any third-party cluster manager. Mesos is another cluster manager which actually supports MapReduce in Hadoop, but it is deprecated now. Yarn is actually the cluster manager in Hadoop 3, and Kubernetes is then again the orchestration platform which helps you to deploy cluster manager for Spark. So in short, cluster manager is actually helping us to allocate resources and also maintain and manage all the worker nodes which are there as part of the cluster. Finally, we have executors. Executors are basically on worker nodes, which actually does the actual task or main task and then send the response back to the driver program. And each worker runs as a separate JVM process on the worker nodes. So executors are actually main backbone of the Spark because they are the ones which are actually doing the task, and driver is actually assigning the task in general. So these are the main three components overall in the Spark architecture. Finally, last but not the least, is the deploy modes. So we talked about the cluster overview of Sparks, but you can submit a Spark application either in a cluster mode, which basically means the driver program runs in a cluster, and client mode. Client mode basically means that your executors are still running in a cluster of worker nodes, but your driver program, your main program, which actually submits the Spark application or which runs the Spark application or which is the main entry point of the Spark application, runs locally. So that's the main difference between cluster versus client, and it's the shortest explanation of what cluster versus client mean if you want to really remember it. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching.